So this idea, if I'm thinking about my own parents and my own experience, it's like, yeah, why would I ever tell my daughter, hey, maybe you should go into broadcast news? Like it would
Nobody says
like
that.
nobody would ever say that.
Honestly, the haters can hate. Just let the creators create and let the creator be judged. I mean, too many mistakes to be grudging. Besides, all of us lost without love. Cause maybe some never get woke, or tired of staying awake, or party all night, then distraught at the state of the day.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacey Lee Kong, and this is Friday Talks Not Bad for Some Immigrants, a video series about the immigrant experience, whatever that means. Today, we're joined by Arti Patel, a senior producer at CBC and the co-founder of DDhood, a collective of South Asian women working in creative industries. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for being here.
Of course, happy to be here.
Okay, so tell me the story of DDhood. How did it come about?
So DDhood was an idea that my co-founders and I sort of sat on for 8 years after we had graduated university. And it was just not really a thoroughly formed idea, but it was something that we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to have a space for South Asian women because we were all South Asian women who were just entering journalism, but we just didn't know what it would look like. So for years and years, we've kind of toyed around with different ideas. And it was about 6 years ago that I actually went to a talk about entrepreneurship and, women sort of balancing having several jobs. And it just kind of clicked for me that day. Like, it doesn't matter what it is right now, let's just launch it. So we talked to the community, we talked to our mentors, and we launched this collective of South Asian women who worked in different industries and creative fields. So media, film, arts. And, what sort of started as panel discussions and mentorships has now grown into a full-blown community that, supports each other, that helps each other get to these places. And that's something that we're super proud of.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I think it's interesting. You were all in media, or all in journalism. Why did you want it to be wider than just journalism, though?
I think because we saw the need that some of the challenges that we were facing, being young brown women who were coming from homes or coming from communities that didn't have any of these jobs really out there for us to see. We didn't know anybody in acting. We didn't know anybody in film. We didn't know anybody who was writing for a publication. So we realized really quickly that these sort of issues already existed. And it didn't matter which sort of community we came from. All three of us are different types of South Asian.
Yeah.
And what we quickly learned is that it's widespread and it's common. So we ended up expanding it because we started seeing people reach out to us who were like, hey, I work in the film industry. I'm trying to direct a film. And like, do you know anybody else that I can connect to? And we were like, yes, we do. Like, here you go. And that's sort of how our mentorship program actually started, because people had been reaching out to us if they could make a connection with another South Asian woman.
I just think it's so cool. I think sometimes there's this, especially in creative industries in general, there's this feeling, the scarcity feeling, like there's not that much money and there's not that many opportunities. And like, I think we are often encouraged, sometimes explicitly, but a lot of times implicitly, to keep everything that we have for ourselves, or like to keep things tight, or like, we're going to be in competition with one another. And I love that actually this was, from the very beginning, the foundation of this is, how do we share resources? How do we share expertise? How do we like build this community bigger?
Yes, because I think leading up to that was the reality.
Yeah.
So when you worked, for example, in journalism, and I know this because I've talked to reporters who maybe have a decade of career experience on me. And this is what they say. When they were hired, there was only room for one brown girl.
Yeah.
Or when they were, in a certain newsroom, like they were the only ones there. And there was so much competition. And to me, that is like, it's crazy to think about that, being in a workplace where how can there only just be one South Asian voice or South Asian perspective? But when I first started in the industry, I realized very quickly that it was very difficult for me. And I was scared to the idea of even reaching out to somebody and asking for help was almost impossible, because those walls were already there. So when we launched DDhood, it was important for us to make sure that these walls didn't exist. So if somebody did want to reach out to me and ask me, what is it like working in a newsroom? What was it like graduating, looking for a job? These are things that I could answer, and accessibility needed to be more important than ever.
Yeah. Have you ever been the only one in the newsroom?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Like, you know what that's like.
Of course. And it's funny because the more I progress in my career, I still see it. It's not something that maybe I see widely as much anymore because I think we are seeing more diverse newsrooms and we're seeing people of all backgrounds, working in different types of jobs. But I think the more specialized you get, and I worked in lifestyle for a long time, that's when you really start noticing the differences and you start noticing it from both ends. It's not just you working as a writer or reporter. You look in the communications world, you see it there too.
Yeah.
And a lot of that influences, the type of content that we do. And that's something that you have to work through and learn through, what are the barriers that will give you in your career.
100%. And as you get more senior, like we're talking about you as a senior producer, like that, I have found that as you look higher and higher up mastheads or up whatever the list is in broadcast, I don't actually know, but that is where there's less diversity too. Like it keeps coming up. It's not like we are progressing quite in the way that I think we talk about it.
For sure. And I think those are the harder places just to see that diversity because, even at my level, I'm working with people that have been working in the industry for 25 years, right? And I'm at that point, if I'm expected to keep going higher, that pool around me is still there. So I think in any industry, when we start moving more ahead, that's what you start running into. You have people that have been there for a long time and they're not really going anywhere. And that's really where their job is also there. But then it's harder for us and it's harder for someone like me who may be in middle management to get that experience to get to the next level. So
exactly.
It's funny because everyone talks about breaking into the industry is sort of the hardest part. And it is. I think it's really difficult. But once you're in it, getting up and making decisions is even harder.
There's been some really interesting research about who leaves, and it's often racialized women, and especially Black women, in the sort of middle management area because it's about the retention as well.
Of course. That's real. Like not having, I think, opportunity when you are in those positions. And I think the hardest part too, something that I've experienced and struggled with in my career is the training. I feel like I was a manager at a very young age, but nobody really
No one
taught
told you
me.
how to be a manager.
No, nobody gave me a book and said, this is how you do it. And I think it's so much unlearning because you have to unlearn sort of the management that you went through and you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, what works for me? And I think people, it's easy to say, oh, management is this or that. It's a lot of work. And
it's hard.
It's a lot of work. So that was a big unlearning for me too.
Yeah.
And I think those are the opportunities that don't exist. When are we training people who are already in the industry? When are we allowing them to expand their skill set? And it's just so rare. And sometimes it's so exhausting that you leave. And I get it. I 100% get it.
Yeah. But I do think to bring it back to Didihood, it's this like ongoing value that it's not just how can you help someone who has less experience than you and wants to know candidly what does it mean to navigate this industry. It's also a chance for you then to see other people in leadership positions and be like, hey, how do you navigate this thing? Because I am at a loss.
For sure. I think that's the beauty of being in a community of like-minded people because we were, starting with a group of 20, 30 people that we kind of knew about, working in one city and we're like, oh, you should come to our event. And now it's so big that every time I see a new name, I'm like, holy crap, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Because I had no idea that you worked in this space or, what was the origin story of you getting in that space? And that I think is the most fulfilling part is you keep meeting more and more people with really interesting careers. And especially South Asians in a city like Toronto, we have so many creatives in every industry. Writers, actors. It's incredible
Artists,
to see.
Illustrators. There's so many.
It's incredible to see that. And I don't think there's ever been a space for people to get together, but also to highlight their work. In Didihood, we do a grant program we just started a couple of years ago where we give $500 grants to women in creative industries. And they basically pitch us their project or what they're working on. Yeah. And we partnered with two other South Asian groups in the city as well. And going through those applications, I remember I did it in my first year. These are names that I've never seen before. Yeah. People that don't have social media exposure, people that don't have massive followings, people that you can't shop at your retail store. So how on earth would they ever get that exposure? And I thought at that point, like, we're just giving a grant to someone and, that's great. That's an accomplishment. But we're also expanding their community And that's when you work in the space where community building, it's even more important because it's not just about recognizing someone for something that they're doing. It's actually giving them space to do their job in your own community, like bringing it back to the community.
Yeah. I often think about like when you're an immigrant to this country, like when I think of my parents I came when I was 4, so I was not struggling in the same way, but so often what you're doing is trying to survive. And so you don't get to pursue your creative interests. You don't get to prioritize those things. And I think that leads to this idea that we don't have them, which is not true. And so in addition to this idea of expanding the community, what I actually really love is like expanding the idea of who we are and what we can be, that like we belong in these spaces and we have these ideas and we have these stories to tell. And those stories are also important. Like that all is so exciting. Like this is this knock-on effect that you're not necessarily thinking about. You're just thinking about like, how can I help this person who's asked for this support? But you're really holding up or like supporting the idea that we also have stories.
And sometimes it's easy as that, right? Like giving them space to do it. Maybe it's posting something on social media today. But easily that's when these connections happen. And I find now more than ever, and I don't know what it is, maybe it's just my own community, we are more willing to support each other versus in the past, where I think people just, and I don't know why. Maybe there's this, and maybe it's a competition feeling. Maybe it's this idea that there can only be, one artist. There's only one hate copy in, from the GTA. But that's just not the case that I find anymore. Like I get really excited when I see young South Asian women who are selling things or who are making moves. And I think it gives you the energy to keep promoting them. And that I think is something that's a little bit new. And that's something that I've really found through Didihood, because in the past, I don't know what it is. Like maybe we never had the chance to talk about each other's creative sides like the same way before.
I think that's probably part of it. I think some of it is normalized. I also think, and maybe this is like a total reach, but it's really difficult to see how much money is in the world and who has access to it, and then still be like, oh, this is a meritocracy. Like we know that it's not a meritocracy. And in some ways for me, that makes it a lot easier to be like, well, we are all winning then. We are all going to have access. Like we're all going to figure it out. It just makes me annoyed actually. And so that is a motivating factor. It's spite. I'm just motivated by spite. But I want everybody to have these opportunities. And like people are doing beautiful, interesting, cool, creative things. Like so many people are doing those things. Why would we not be excited about that? Because otherwise what? Like we're just going to pay bills? We're going to decide what to cook every night, and then that's not the meaning of life, yo.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you about the stereotype that immigrant kids aren't encouraged to pursue the arts, because I think that has not been my experience. Like my experience has been that my parents have always been very supportive, but I think the stereotype of like our parents want us to be engineers and lawyers and doctors and whatever is like funny. We lean on that for humor a lot. And not to say it's untrue, but I almost wonder if it sends the opposite message of what we want, or like it kind of sells our family short. And so I wanted to ask you what you think about that. Like, what do you think of that stereotype to start with?
So that question's so interesting because I think there is some truth around it, but I think there's reasons why it exists. So when I think about creative industries and finding a job that's not a lawyer or doctor, like that's, I think, the joke that most, brown kids will go up to.
Yes.
But the first thing I think about is representation. And we use it so loosely, like, oh, representation matters. But it actually does matter. And when we're talking about industries where our parents are immigrants, are coming to these new cities, these new societies, and they are, you talked about surviving, they're, going through their life and trying to make a career for themselves. If at any point they are not seeing a career that is not a norm for them, they will never talk about it. So when I was young, I was not encouraged to play music. I was not encouraged to draw. It wasn't like my parents were banning these things from me. They just did not know about these things in a real way that I think I would do that today with my children, right? It's a very different experience. So I don't think my parents ever didn't, like, they never said don't do something, but I don't think I had the opportunity. So when I learned about writing, it was through school. I really, I love to write, I love to draw, and I always thought of these as like creative hobbies. And as I got older, they were still hobbies because everybody around me was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
My family is actually really creative, and I don't think I actually appreciated that until my 30s. Like I learned that everybody is really talented, that we have a ton of artists, and now I'm seeing my nieces who are incredible painters and I'm like, wow, this is so great. I'm like, you know what? Our whole family can do this.
Yeah.
But we just never like tapped actually into the skill set. So this idea, if I'm thinking about my own parents and my own experiences, like, yeah, why would I ever tell my daughter, hey, maybe you should go into broadcast news? Like it would
Nobody says
like
that.
nobody would ever say
Yes.
that. And I think about this idea of survival, and that's like very real. And I think
Yeah.
about my parents who came to Canada. They didn't finish school. They were working factory jobs, and their mindset of living in this country just became about money.
Yeah.
So in their brain, like, what is money? You're a lawyer, you're a doctor, and you're going to be successful, and you're not going to have to make the same sacrifices. So I think that is a massive weight to it.
Yeah.
Because as I aged and I talked about, the possibility of, maybe I would apply to journalism school, I also had to apply to business school because
Yeah.
it wasn't about, my parents would like disown me if I went to this school. It was just, there's no confidence there. And I think when you're young, a lot of that confidence comes from your family.
Absolutely.
And I just didn't get it and I didn't have it. So I had family members, my extended family who was like, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
Because after I got in, it was a real decision. Like,
Yeah.
I had to choose. And they were like, what if you just work at Omni? Like, what if you
Right.
just end up somewhere where you're not really in a large newsroom? I'm like, oh, maybe that's true. Like, I don't know. Like,
That's it.
You can't tell a 17 or 18-year-old that. So that I think is the hardest part. And I now that I've been working for 12 years, like my parents are super supportive. They love what I do and they tell everybody. They may not understand what I do.
Yes.
And I think that's a
That
struggle.
is another
That's
part
a
of the
hard
struggle,
part,
yeah.
But I think they're so proud of the idea of like, look at my daughter who did this. And, I'm the first person in my entire community to work a job that I work. The littlest thing sometimes I think we don't even think about it. But I think that's where a lot of the stereotype comes from. It's this struggle, I think, for parents to have financial freedom and financial stability. And that's something that, I don't have to struggle with like they did.
Yeah.
And because of that, and this is the other part of this, the hard part of this is when you keep telling people that this is your reality, you're never going to pursue arts, right? Like if you keep telling people that, oh, there's no jobs out there if you want
Yeah.
to draw. Oh, you draw for fun. Oh, you like to make videos on YouTube like today or TikTok, like that's all for fun. But the moment we start tapping into skill set, that's when we see that these are jobs that could be, careers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you can work anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a newsroom. You can work for a massive corporation. Like that's the hard part. And that's kind of what we have to get through.
Yes. But I think it's just so interesting and a bit more complicated than like that is definitely happening. But at the same time, I love that your whole family is so creative. And you were talking about your nieces, I think. Mm-hmm. So my nieces are also super creative. They are working in creative fields. My niece Haley did the set design, like she's an interior designer. So getting to see that too is like so exciting and interesting to be like, oh yeah, once we are given the opportunity, once we are like given some of that space, like we absolutely run with it.
For sure.
And we have like things to contribute to these communities or to these industries.
It's unfortunate that I didn't learn that until I was like 30 years old.
But same. But then like I don't know, that's how change happens.
Yeah, it's true.
Like your nieces are gonna learn it younger, and then their kids are gonna learn it younger, and eventually we're gonna like kind of progress out of this phase, maybe.
100%.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Okay, so to bring it back to Didihood though, because yes, our parents and our families are definitely factors in why we might pursue or not pursue. But what are the other barriers that you were talking about that your community is facing that is preventing immigrant and diaspora kids from getting into these fields that they want to?
I think also the industry itself is the hardest barrier to break through.
Yeah.
Because they're not diverse. Traditionally, there have been hiring practices at most places where you only get a job because you know somebody else. And that pool is smaller and smaller because we're working in industries that are even tighter these days, where it's hard to find jobs, layoffs are common, people are not taking the time to do the training or to get people in any sort of junior or starting space. So I think those are the actual barriers within the industry itself. So when you come up with that and you don't have family support, you don't have community support, maybe you don't know anybody else in the industry, it's almost impossible to get through it. And I think one of the hardest barriers to even get through is allowing equal opportunity for some of these positions.
Right.
And when I talk about equal opportunity, it's not just looking at resumes and saying, oh, this person went to this school and this person went to this school. It's how can I invest in someone? How can I give them the chance to learn more, expand their skill set, to actually be creative? Because sometimes that's the hardest barrier. When we don't get that chance, it's impossible to start your career.
Yeah. I feel like I have an instinctive understanding of this, but I would love to hear, why do you think we, and like this collective we, like immigrant and diaspora kids, why do we belong in these spaces though? Why do all of this work?
Because these spaces were never there for us. And when you don't have space and you don't have community members who are engaging in that space, it almost feels like you're silenced. It almost feels like your story doesn't matter or your voice doesn't matter. And I look at the media landscape now because that's where I work. And it's amazing when I see stories about myself or my community that's being reflected, or if I see shows that I'm watching or movies that I'm watching, and I'm like, hey, I can relate to this. Yeah. But the hardest thing for me is I just don't like this conversation of like, oh, that's the first time it happened, and like, great, we have this one person. Because it's the same problem, right? We should be watching and consuming content and listening to content where it's just such a commonality. And that's why that space matters, because you have to be in that space to be heard, right? That's I think why we do Didi Hood. Like if we didn't do this, I'm really hoping somebody else would have done it, because I think for myself, even I belong in that space, and I think I should be able to talk about this experience, and I should encourage somebody else, and maybe I will encourage a young person to think, oh, maybe I can do this as well. So yeah, I think the space hasn't existed. We belong in it just like anybody else, and I think our stories deserve to be told too.
What do you think has to happen? Like, what do you want to see happen next?
We need to be in a space where we're comfortable. Okay, I love this idea that when you're in a room and you're talking about something, you talk about your community. Yeah. You talk about people that you're working with. You talk about people that are in these spaces that, are looking for the next big break. Like, we just need to talk about this more. We need to support each other more. And I've talked about it earlier, like this is the first time where I'm seeing people getting excited when they see other South Asian creatives doing things. We need more of that. We need more of that where it gets to a point where that person is getting a television show, that person is premiering at TIFF, that person's at the Real Asian Film Festival. Like we need to keep encouraging and supporting within our own community. And that just has to be the norm, right? Because as great as it is when I see like Iman and Maitri, and like they're on Netflix and they're on Marvel and they're doing these incredible things and they're inspiring so many young women to think about this as a job opportunity, or even behind the scenes, like coming up with a story like this and presenting it to the world. We need like 15 more of those. We need like 16 more of those, right? Yes. Like 80 more of those. Like that needs to keep happening. And that's when it's normalized. That's when I don't want to have to keep having a conversation like in 20 years from now that this was this thing that we did and we were the first to do it. Like this is common now. It's common for South Asians to be in creative industries. Yeah. That's the change that I want to see.
I love that. Is there anything you want to promo or shout out?
So for Didi Hood, we are hoping to continue our in-person events, but one thing that we're really excited about is bringing back our mentorship program. It's going to be our 4th year doing this, and that's one of the most rewarding things, and this year we want it bigger than ever.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. You know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe. If you'd like more Friday in your life, you can follow @_FridayThings on Instagram, or go to www.fridaythings.com/subscribe to sign up for the newsletter. Arti, where can people find you and Didi Hood?
It's Didi Hood on Instagram.
Okay,
that's where you find us.
Go find. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it, get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it. I'm talking about ways we can elevate. Stepping up, staring, we escalate. Don't try to separate, we'll get together and celebrate. I can do everything, I just don't hesitate. I can do anything.
Allow me to demonstrate.
I just can't wait, I just cannot be me. I just can't go